Cool. So, welcome to the session this morning. Hope you're all well rested after a good sleep last night, and same with your children. I hope they're well rested as well. I'd like to introduce you to Denise McKenzie. Denise McKenzie is a counsellor, and today she's going to be speaking to us about managing conflict within marriage. But before we get started, I thought we could start with a small prayer. So let's pray. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Dear Lord, we thank you for the opportunity to gather here this morning. We ask that you bless the children as they go off in their separate formational sessions. And we ask that you bless our session as we come to understand conflict in marriage with eyes focused on Jesus. Amen. Amen. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. So let's welcome Denise.
Right, I hope you can hear me. Is that right? My name's Denise McKenzie. Just to tell you a bit about myself, I got married at St Matthew's Church in Silverdale 31 years ago. I've got two grown children, Emma who's 29, Reed who's 26, and I attend St Pius Church, but obviously not today. I have a Bachelor of Social Science majoring in counselling, and I'm in private practice at the moment. I work with individuals, but I also have a specialty area of working with couples. Alex asked me to talk about any topic I wanted to talk about today about marriage, and I have chosen conflict. People might wonder why I chose that rather than communication, but poor communication leads to conflict, and it's the thing that most people will come to me around. So firstly, what would be the difference for me between a Christian marriage and a secular marriage, and why does it differ when I have couples in who are Christians? I don't think you perhaps realise that you've got a real advantage if you have a Christian marriage that's based on faith, because there's actually three people in this marriage. For the start, it's considered a sacrament. It's a covenant with God, and you've taken on an unbreakable promise. Matthew 9:4-6, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined together, let no man put asunder. I like put asunder instead of separate. The problem with modern day at the moment is a lot of people don't consider their marriages to be a covenant, and they often walk away from marriages quite easily, I find. So from my point of view, it's much easier to counsel a couple that are Christian. And as a Christian couple, you also have the support of your family and your parish. A question I get asked a lot is, why is marriage so hard, and is it meant to be this hard? But if you ask anyone who's been married for a long time, it is going to have its ups and downs, and it is going to be tested. It's very easy to be married when things are going well and we don't have any problems, and we don't have things like family deaths, redundancies, money problems, wayward teenagers. It's a lot harder to be married when that is put to a test and our vows are actually tested. I'd like to start by talking about where I got my methods from and what I use and why I understand how couples fight and how they manage conflict. I've done a lot of postgraduate research into couple work, and I just want to quote Isaac Newton, who said, "If I have seen further, it is because I am standing on the shoulders of giants." People have spent decades studying couple work, and some of the people I'd like to acknowledge Drs. John and Julie Gottman, Esther Perel, Susan Johnson, and Martin Payne, because I will be quoting some of their research while I'm doing this. So what causes conflict in a marriage in my experience? There's quite a few different things. First one's parenting. The different styles of parenting that we have inherited. Sometimes you either embrace your own experience of what your parents did, or you reject it. For example, if your father was unloving, you might decide to show more love to your children. We don't know when we marry someone what sort of parent they will be. So these things are going to come up about how you discipline your children. Children sometimes will divide and conquer, and they will get between parents. But remember, they are just children, and they don't set up to break up parents or put a strain on a marriage. But it is a common reason people come in to me for. Another common thing is infidelity. And when I talk about infidelity, it is not just men, it is women as well. And when I talk about infidelity, how I defined infidelity in a marriage is anything where there is secret keeping. You must consider the marriage that you've got as your primary relationship, the most important relationship you've got. And any time you keep a secret from your partner, and that is by texting someone outside the marriage, emailing them, doing any sort of flirting that's not appropriate, anything you would not do when your partner was standing with you, is infidelity. Now, things have changed over the decades when it comes to infidelity. In my mother's day, if your partner cheated on you, you were inclined to stay in the marriage. You would stay because it wasn't the thing to leave. Now, what I see with the clients that come and see me is that has changed substantially. The shame of having infidelity occur in a marriage will actually make people leave the marriage. And I say that because if a man's wife cheats on him, you'll find that his friends and his family will encourage him to end that marriage. There's almost a shame to stay in a marriage now if someone has cheated on you. Esther Perel, who is a counsellor in America, she tries to term it, if you think about, we've got our first marriage, which is our primary relationship, and through that, say you were married for 10 years, and during that 10 years, things happened that you weren't very happy with, it was difficult, you had challenges, but all in all, it was a good marriage, and then infidelity fractures that marriage. One person has broken their vows. However, I don't believe that that is enough to end a marriage, because you can start a second marriage with the same person. What you need to do is renegotiate that marriage, and you need to set stronger boundaries around it. I see a lot of people where infidelity occurs, and trust me, it is no reason to end a marriage. In fact, some marriages become, believe it or not, stronger after that. The other thing I see that people come for is a clash of values. Now, our values that we hold are either implicit or explicit. They're either ones you can see or ones that you can't see. The ones that you hold that you can't see are things like the need to do service, social justice, honesty, compassion. There are more obviously explicit values, things like status, ambition, wealth, competitiveness. This is where it can be a problem. Dad or mum staying at work long hours at the cost of family time. I see a lot of that. I see men who are very successful, if you were to use money as a yardstick, I suppose, which I don't personally, but they might be seen as the community as a very successful man, a CEO of a large company earning a lot of money, but they're not spending time with their families. You could ask them to name their children's best friends and they couldn't tell you. Could you find your child's teacher at school and they wouldn't know who that person was? Money does not help a marriage. It's time that you spend with your wife. Facebook, I think, is feeding into this. Facebook leads us to compare ourselves to other people. People are taking photos of their dinner, their shoes, their overseas trips. I don't know where that fits and why that is an important thing. And in our grandparents' day, they would see virtue in things like modesty and being humble. And I don't know where Facebook would sit in all this gloating. I'm always interested in the values that a couple shares and holds. I don't have a problem when people have different personalities, but if people hold different values, then it can be a problem. If I'm at home with 3 or 4 children and my husband's working 80 hours a week and he doesn't think it's important to be at home with me, then his need to be ambitious and to earn money might clash with my idea of family happiness. Money is something that people clash about, and that can be linked to these values. But it can also be a hangover from your childhood. For instance, if I came from a childhood where we never had much money, I might think, well, I'm going to enjoy it now, life's short, let's live in the moment. But another person who might not have had much money as a child might be very careful with it, and they might be more conservative and a bit more of a warrior. Matthew 6:24 says, "No one can serve 2 masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will hold to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money." Intimacy is another reason that people come to me. And people say, what is intimacy? Well, I believe it's everything you do. Everything you do in that marriage for that other person, be it make them a cup of tea, show them a kindness, put your arm around them while they're cooking tea. Intimacy leads to sex, and it's not the other way around. The genders and the sexes are very different. Men and women have a very different understanding of what intimacy is. And men want to have sex and physically connect to achieve an emotional connection with their wives, but women need an emotional connection to want that physical connection. There's a lot of misconceptions around sex, and there's been a lot of research, but I could take a whole section on just that, so we'll move on. Poor communication. Couples often go into relationships with poor communication skills. And poor communication can lead people to thinking their partner is hurting them, where it's not their intention. When I do listening exercises with couples, it's interesting how many couples don't listen to their partners and how many couples misinterpret the words their partner uses and also miss the meaning underneath the words. Technology is another area that's causing trouble. Dopamine addictions. You've probably all heard by now that phone companies are trying to encourage people to have dopamine addictions to their phones. People often say to me, I'm not addicted to my phone, and I might say, well, do you take it to the bedroom? Yes. Do you check it before you go to sleep? Yes. Do you check it when you wake up? Yes. Do you carry it from room to room? Yes. Do you have it on the couch while you watch TV? Yes. I think we could be dealing with a dopamine addiction here. Because every time we get, someone sends us a message and we get a beep, the pleasure centre of our brain lights up. So this is becoming a real concern. And it's not just phone addiction, it's also, there are grown men out there who also have gaming addictions as well. And when you look at the brain of a heroin addict and you look at a brain that is impacted by technology addiction, they look very similar. So when you use your phone in front of your partner, what do you think that says about their importance? It puts up a wall to them. And people will sit on the couch watching TV and they'll be looking at their phone, looking at the TV, but they're not actually talking to their partner. It's usually one person gets more angry than the other about it. Family conflict. By family conflict, I mean your partner's family, the in-laws. People have a very strong need to have loyalty from their partners, in particular women. Women want to see themselves as number one. If they start to see themselves as not number one, but number 5 or 6, you are going to have trouble. I have women who say to me, I'll say, where do you fit in the marriage? And they'll go, well, there's his work, there's his family, there's his friends, there's his drinking, there's fishing, there's the kids, there's the dog, and it's not going so well for them. And I'm afraid that mother-in-laws think they're giving helpful advice on how to look after their sons sometimes, but it can sound awfully like criticism. I have seen so much strife when mothers clash with their daughter-in-laws. I can remember as a young wife myself having the impact of my husband's mother saying things to me, and I'm sure she meant to be helpful, but she'd say things like, oh, Luke, you look like you're not eating properly. Or, what are you doing with your hair right now? I don't like it like that. So, as a mother now, with a son who's engaged, I'm going to be very careful not to try to split his loyalty. She will want support from your family, your wife, when it comes to the extended family. And just remember, this is your primary relationship. Strangely enough, I often find it is between mothers and sons where the conflict comes in. Now, Genesis 2:24 says, for this reason a man will leave his mother and father and be united with his wife. It is so important. This is actually repeated in Matthew 19:5 and Mark 10:11. So remember that when you got married, you promised to leave your father and mother and be united with your wife. I'm not saying be disloyal to your family, but just think about who your loyalties lie with. So a few more problems that lead to conflict. A difference in preferred influence. By that I mean one person wants to be more dominant in the relationship than the other. So there's a power imbalance. There can be a difference in ambition and the importance of work. So one person is more ambitious and work-orientated, and one person might want to return to work and another one might want to stay at home. One partner wants you to work harder and make more money. There's often a difference in neatness and organisation. One person is neat and tidy and the other is messy. Difference in wanting time together or time apart. One person wants more alone me time and the other wants to spend more time together. The difference on being on the go or staying at home. One person is more extroverted and people-orientated. They want company and they want to go out. And the other person's more introverted and they prefer unwinding at home. Difference in punctuality. One person is always on time and one person is always late. Difference in excitement. One person feels a greater need for life to be adventurous, exciting than the other. A lot of people, believe it or not, want to leave their marriages because they believe they are boring. So if all these things create conflict, how do we deal with it? And what do we do when conflict arises? People say that conflict happens in the first 3 minutes. I believe it happens in the first 3 sentences. There's been a lot of research into couple conflict and all this entrenched behaviour that people have. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Gottman's Love Labs. The Gottmans, Julie and John Gottman, are clinicians that live in America, and they've spent 40 years studying marriage. And they've had 5,000 couples through their program so far. They do a thing called the Love Lab. So what they do is they take a couple, say my husband and myself, and they put us into a B&B for 48 hours. So they take us away and say, just enjoy yourselves, eat lunch, go for walks, do what you want, don't worry about us. But for 48 hours, they're actually going to be watching us on cameras. There's going to be cameras all through that B&B. Obviously not in the bedroom, in the bathroom. While we're doing this, we're also going to have heart monitors on us. They're going to be watching our heart rate. They're also every now and then going to take blood from us, and they're going to take urine from us. I know that sounds a little bit invasive, but it is a free weekend after all. So what they're doing is they're looking for particular things. What they're looking for is if my husband and I interact, they're looking at what happens to my heart when we interact. They're also looking at what happens to my blood. If there's conflict in a marriage, our white blood cell count is going to go down. This means that we're more likely to get sick. It affects our immunity. They're also going to be looking for cortisol in my urine, because when I get angry or when I get upset, my adrenal glands are going to kick in, and when they do, cortisol is going to be produced, and the urine is the quickest place to find it. We also find it in children from houses that have got a lot of conflict. You'll find cortisol in their urine as well. So what they're doing is they're watching us for 2 days. They're watching our tone. They're watching how we look at each other. They're watching whether I reply to my husband when he says something like, do you want a cup of tea? If he's sitting looking out, say we're at Raglan, and he sees a boat go past, and he goes, hey, honey, there's a really nice boat out there. If I don't say anything, if I'm in the kitchen, they would consider that I've dropped a bit of connection. So what they've done is a lot of study around what happens when couples are really good at marriage and when they're really bad at marriage. So as you can imagine, over the span of 40 years, they've done a lot of research, and they now understand what happens in a good marriage and what happens in a bad marriage. Some of these people have been together for 30, 40 years now, and we call them the masters of marriage, and the other ones are called the disasters of marriage. So what he did is he came up with the idea that there were conflict personalities in a marriage. And from those 4 conflict personalities, you end up with patterns of conflict. The idea of the 4 horsemen came to him. Let's click on this. From the Bible. The 4 horsemen of the apocalypse were pestilence, war, famine, and death. But we have different names for them. We call the 4 horsemen. The first one's criticism. What I'm going to do is I'm going to describe the different 4 horsemen, and I'd like you to sort of think about whether you've actually witnessed or felt or seen any of those, or whether you can relate to them yourself. Because these are the things that are going to bring down a marriage. I'm looking for these when I've got a couple in front of me. Now, the first one's criticism. So what is it? It's when you want to tell your partner something, or you want them to get to do something for you, and the way you say it is received as criticism from them. If I say something to my husband like, you need to do this, you should do that, you must do that, you never do this, every time I talk like that, there's a good chance he's going to feel criticised. It might not be intentional. I might think I'm being really helpful. And a lot of critical people do. They say, I don't mean to be a critical person, but I just think that I've got a better way of doing things. But remember Proverbs 15:4. Gentle words are a tree of life, and a deceitful tongue crushes the spirit. The more criticism there is in a marriage, and the more your partner feels criticised, you are going to crush their spirit, and they're going to react to you. I'm going to the next one. Defensiveness. Defensiveness is when your partner has said something that I would read as a criticism, and I feel I need to defend myself. So my husband came in and he went, God, the house is a real mess. And I might say, well, you've got no busy, how busy I've been during the day. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to push back against him. This is something that people, once this becomes entrenched, they become defensive at everything. They get to a point in their marriage where anything their partner sees to them, they see as criticism. They could say the sky is blue and they would think they were having a go. So they're constantly defending themselves, and they're constantly, if you get into an argument with someone who's defensive, they will change the subject and they will bring up something else because they will try to divert you in a different direction. Proverbs 12:16. A fool is quick-tempered, a wise man stays cool when insulted. If your partner has said something that you think is criticism, I want you to think about it and think about whether they've got a good point. For instance, say my husband said to me, honey, can you ring mum tomorrow and talk about the family Christmas? Because he's out of town. And he comes back and he said, well, what are the plans? And I went, mentally thinking, I forgot, I'm in trouble here. Instead of saying, sorry, I got too busy and I forgot, I'll go, well, I've been really busy. I mean, I don't know, why don't you ring her? But when a defensive person answers, they're trying to deflect blame off themselves. The next one we see is contempt. This is a really nasty one. This is the one where if this is present when I'm seeing a couple, I know I'm in big trouble. If the Gottmans are in front of a couple, they've got so good at this job that if the couple was sitting in front of them, particularly if contempt came up, within 4 minutes they could tell you with 91% accuracy if that couple were going to split up. Contempt is really strong and it becomes from frustration. You've become frustrated by your partner, so you move from criticism, the gloves come off, and you'll say terrible things to each other. When I have a couple that are into contempt, sometimes there's a lot of name calling, there's a lot of swearing, there's a lot of put downs. You just shouldn't do it. Sometimes they haven't got to the point where they're verbally using contempt, but they're mentally thinking it. They're mentally thinking, my partner's not as good as I am. Contempt's almost a sort of way of being superior to your partner, and you're actually using words to purposefully hurt them. So it's much harsher than criticism, and it's a real danger sign for me. Luke 6:13 says, do not judge, and you will not be judged. Do not condemn, and you will not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. That contempt and condemnation is something that you really need to get rid of. Now, stonewalling. This is a really interesting one. Stonewalling means that you've been overwhelmed, if I put it up there, by the exchange, and you've had your fight or flight activated, and you shut down. What we see when we do tests on people who are into fight and flight, what will happen to me? Say I'm feeling threatened. I might not be threatened by a wild animal running in here about to attack me, but I may feel threatened by my husband saying something I don't like. My brain doesn't know the difference between a physical threat and a verbal threat. So what happens is my amygdala, which is based deep in my brain, is going to light up and it's going to signal to my body that I'm under threat. When that happens, the blood from my prefrontal cortex here is going to go to the back of my head. When that happens, it's going to the back of my head because it's starting to fill up my arms and my legs. The reason is that when I get activated into fight or flight, we're biological animals. We've actually been conditioned to either fight a threat or run from a threat. My heart's also going to start beating harder. It's going to beat over 100 beats a minute. What I do sometimes when I've got couples in really strong conflict is I'll put a heart monitor on them and see where their heart rate is, and then I'll get them to have an argument and see how high it goes. And then we've got to knock it on the head at a certain point. But it shows that our bodies physically react to anything we perceive as a threat. So my adrenal glands are telling me I need to do something, so they're trying to fire me up. That's why the cortisol is going into my urine. At this stage, if I'm feeling really threatened like that, I've got a few options. I can either just stop talking and freeze and not go anywhere, or I could walk out of the room. Or I could actually get up and start physically fighting. It's not something women tend to do. It's something that men tend to stonewall more than women. 81% of the time it's them that do it. Most men can contain themselves and most men will get up and walk out of the room, but some men unfortunately won't. They will lose their temper, and once they've lost their temper, that's when violence can happen. The thing when someone's in stonewalling, it's very frustrating for the other person because the other person is trying to get information. Remember, they were trying to say things like, where is this? You should have done that. Now they've got a partner who's actually stopped talking on them, and that's really frustrating, and that can actually make them angrier. Proverbs 25:28 says, a person without self-control is like a city with broken down walls. I try to teach men and women when they get to this point, they've got to contain themselves and they need to get out of that situation. and I say to the other partner who's got them to stonewalling, they need to cool off. You need to let them leave the room. Because at that stage, the argument's not going to go well. The person you're arguing with has got no blood flow to the logical part of their brain, which would reason with you. So while someone is talking to a stonewaller, they're thinking, I don't know what they want. I wish they'd shut up. Just leave me alone. Just be quiet. They're not talking necessarily, but mentally they're still in the fight, but they're probably really struggling with it. So why do we have these different conflict styles? When we meet our partners and fall in love with them, sometimes we underestimate the impact our family conflict has had on us. So often we model our conflict on what we have seen as a child. So if I've grown up in a family where mum and dad didn't talk an awful lot, I certainly didn't see any conflict. I would think conflict is not something that normally happens. It would be foreign to me. And if mum and dad did have a conflict, they might have been quite discreet. They might have got up, gone into different rooms, quietened down, come back in. And as children, I didn't witness any of that. My partner might be from a very different family. In his family, he might have been encouraged that everyone spoke their mind, stood up, yelled at each other, tried to resolve conflict, argued, didn't go to bed on an argument, but everyone in the house knew there was an argument going on. So when you get these two different styles together, it can cause a real problem because on my hand, I'm thinking if you loved me, you wouldn't be yelling, and he's thinking if you loved me, you'd stand here and yell. You wouldn't just walk out of the room. So there is a real problem when these two different styles meet each other, and I think before we get married, it would be good for everyone to understand the background of their partner and the conflict style they've come from. So let's give a real life example. It's not a real life example, but I'll use one. Say I'm the wife. So Denise says to her husband when he comes in from work, did you remember sports day on Friday at school? Because you're supposed to be coming. And he goes, I can't go to that. I've got a meeting on. So as the wife, I might say something like, you said you would arrange it. Now, depending on my tone, because I've said you said, he's going to see that as a criticism. He might become quite defensive at that point. He's tired, he's come home, he's had a long day, and he's in trouble. He might say something like, do you have any idea what's going on at work at the moment? That would be him being defensive. He's realised he's in trouble and he's trying to push back. And then I might go, I bet you forgot to ask. You never come to any school things. I'm getting frustrated now because I wanted him to be there. And he might say, I do the best I can. It's not that easy. The words underneath that sometimes when someone's saying it is, he wants some acknowledgement. I work hard, I pay the bills, I'm always in trouble. And I might go, well, I guess I'll go as usual. The kids are used to you not turning up anyway. That would be a form of contempt. I'm almost trying to imply that I'm a better partner than him. At this point, my husband might start to feel quite overwhelmed. He's starting to feel, I'm in trouble, I don't know what to say to her. His mind might be a little bit blank, there's nothing I can do. He might stop talking to me. If he stops talking to me, then I'm probably going to get frustrated and say something like, well, that's great. That's what you always do in conflict, isn't it? You just sit there and don't say anything. So what can you do? There are antidotes to all of these things. Criticism for a start. If you identify yourself as someone who could be a bit critical, I think you need to think about how you say things, how you approach a topic. Say things like, I would really appreciate that. Or use your own point of view like I instead of you. For instance, say there was a load of wet washing here and I said to my husband, you never do the washing, you never do any housework, you need to hang that out. That would not be a good way of putting it. Whereas if I said, I would really appreciate it if you could hang that out. I haven't got much time and I'm on my way to work. Ephesians 4:29 says, do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, but only what is helpful for building up others according to their needs, that it may benefit those who listen. We really need to slow down our communication and sometimes think about what we're saying and how we're saying it before we say it to our partners. Romans 15:7, accept one another then, just as Christ accepted you in order to bring praise to God. You accepted your partner when you married them. You accepted them for better or worse. And now you get to a situation where you're telling them their behaviour is not acceptable. So most arguments will start with criticism and it will start as I say, probably in the first words that come out of your mouth. However, you might just think that you're being useful, but instead of saying, for instance, you said you would arrange it, you could say, I'm disappointed and I really wish you were joining us. Now, defensiveness, what is the antidote to that? When you can feel defensiveness arise in response to something your partner has said, I want you to think, has my partner got a point here? Maybe I let them down. Maybe I did hurt them. John Gottman says, not apologising means your ego is more important than your marriage. I'm not asking you to apologise for things that you haven't done, but if you genuinely have forgotten something and your partner has asked you to do it, you would be far better to say, yes, I'm sorry, I'll do it tomorrow. I just got too busy, rather than just sit there and defend your position. In Proverbs 18:13, to answer before listening, that is folly and shame. Often people don't really listen to what their partner is saying and assess it, and they go straight into defensiveness. A lot of my work with couples around listening and talking about their needs and what they want is about teaching them to listen more effectively to their partners. So if your partner does share something without criticising, I want you to hear them. And if you've made a mistake, own it. Saying I'm sorry is the thing that's going to stop this going any further. Because the danger, you're going to creep into contempt, and there's no room for name-calling and nastiness. You're better to describe your feelings and your needs. Don't describe your partner or tell them who they are. This is another common mistake. People say to their partner, you're unaffectionate, you're hopeless, you're useless. Don't even bother doing that. You're always going to do that. They're constantly telling their partner who they are and what they're up to, and that's quite irritating. Don't bring up past hurts. Remember Corinthians 13:5. Often people quote this at marriage regarding love. And part of it says, which I think we should remember, love is not rude, it is not self-seeking, it is not easily angered, and it keeps no record of wrongs. So bringing up something that happened, and people do with me, they bring up things happened 20 years ago. It's sometimes not very productive. So if a wife, when she was getting to contempt because she was getting angry because her husband wasn't going to the sports day, instead of saying, well, I guess I'll go as usual, the kids are used to you not turning up, she'd just say, well, we'll miss you, I'll take some photos, and we'd love to see you there next time. Now, when someone's stonewalling, what is the antidote to stonewalling? We actually call it DPA, diffuse physiological arousal, because we know when someone's in that heightened state, it's very difficult for them to come down from that state. The Gottmans have done a lot of experiments where they've got couples in front of them and they've wound the couples up to have an argument, and they've been filming them. And then they'll say, oh, sorry, we just have to stop this for a minute. We're having problems with our cameras. Can you just go out to the reception and just read some books for half an hour? What they find is when the couples leave the room and start reading magazines and not talking to each other, their heart rate goes down. It depends how fit you are. Sometimes when I test a couple, they might be very fit and their heart rate might be, say, 60 beats a minute. Some people it's up to 100. We're looking for the difference. So what they're doing is seeing how long it takes from, say, someone who is in diffuse physiological arousal at, say, 120, how long it can get them to go back to, say, 90 or 80. And what they found is it generally takes about 20 minutes to half an hour. I tell clients to leave it for at least half an hour, sometimes up to an hour. The reason we do this is you're not going to have an effective conflict while your partner is stonewalling. And what I find is that when a person is stonewalling, their urge often is to leave the argument, to get up and walk out. Now, the problem with that is often the other person follows them. So someone who instinctively knows they need to get out of that room will go to the bedroom, and their partner will follow them there. They'll go to the garage, the partner will follow them there. They'll go to the kitchen, the partner follows them there. And I sit down and say, please do not follow your partner. Agree to have time out. The problem is that you've got one person who really wants to resolve this issue. They might have a really strong need for resolution. They've seen in their family, they've seen maybe good conflict between their parents where things were resolved. So they believe it's a good thing. They believe that this thing needs to be fixed, and it needs to be fixed right now. What I'm saying is your partner is probably incapable of fixing it right now. So I sort of coach my clients to say to the partner, at the moment, I can't talk about this. at the moment I'm a bit overwhelmed. I need some time out. And then you let the person who is in that state of stonewalling to get away from you. Now, for that half an hour, I don't mind what they do. They can go for a walk, they can read a book, they can listen to music. Anything they can do to self-soothe and to get their heart rate down will be good. And finally, why are you so angry, asked the Lord of Cain. Why do you look so dejected? You will be accepted if you do what is right, but if you refuse to do what is right, then watch out. Sin is crouching at the door, eager to control you, but you must subdue it and be its master. By that I mean if you push someone who is in stonewalling, they are trying to control it. If you push them too far, people can snap, and once they've snapped, bad things can happen. I've had people where their instincts tell them to punch holes in the walls, and they've been told to not leave a room in an argument, whereas I'm saying leave a room, calm down, but then get back together and then discuss the matter. When you both agree, okay, let's get back in an hour and let's talk about this. It's not okay for the stonewaller to just leave the conflict completely and to not re-engage with the person, because that's going to let the person who is criticising, who might have wound them up, or contemptuous, to get really angry. Especially as usually one partner has a strong need for resolution and maybe the other one doesn't. Now, I'm not saying that all these conflicts are so terrible. They can be very subtle. They can be not arguing and yelling at each other. It can be a tone of voice. 70% of our communication's body language. So sometimes you can just look at your partner and they know that you're giving them a contemptuous look. So those are my tips for handling conflict. I've also got another couple of books here that I'd recommend. One is The 7 Principles of Making a Marriage Work by John Gottman. This one here. And the other one is a biblical reference guide to the Gottman method. So I use this with Christian couples. This is a book you probably can't get online. It's something that counsellors can get hold of if that's how we want to do our work, but it's quite a good book. When it comes to looking for a counsellor as well, people who are Christian and Catholic would probably prefer a counsellor who holds the same faith that they do. So just a tip, in New Zealand there are 2 counselling associations. There's the New Zealand Association of Counsellors, and then there's the New Zealand Association of Christian Counsellors. Now, most people who are qualified belong to one or the other. It's very expensive for our fees. You know, it's like $500 a year, so most people don't want to join both because it's quite expensive. For instance, I'm in the New Zealand Association of Counsellors, not the New Zealand Association of Christian Counsellors. The reason I did that is because I counsel everybody, and some people just prefer just working with Christians, or they want their clients to identify that way. Don't be afraid of asking your counsellor if they are Christian and what faith they hold. Unfortunately, I've met quite a few counsellors who are atheists, so personally, I wouldn't want to go to somebody who is an atheist because, you know, to me, marriage is quite sacred and it's terribly important and we need to get it right. So I'll just leave you with a small poem, which I'm thinking of marriage when I say this. God has not promised skies always blue, flowers strewn pathways all our lives through. God has not promised sun without rain, joy without sorrow, peace without pain. But God has promised strength for the day, rest for the labour, light for the way, grace for the trials and help from above, unfailing kindness and undying love. So those last 2 things I would wish for everyone here towards your partner: unfailing kindness and undying love. And often people say to me when I meet them for the first time, what can we do for each other in between the sessions till we see you next week? And I'll often just say, can you please just be kind to each other? Because a lot of marriages, unfortunately, couples aren't always kind to each other. Thank you.